At 0859 on the morning of February 19th, 1945, Corporal Tony Stein crouched in the bottom of an amphibious tractor as it churned toward the black sand beaches of Iwo Jima. In his hands was a weapon that did not exist in any Army or Marine Corps manual. He had built it himself from the wreckage of a Navy torpedo bomber. He called it the Stinger. Stein was 23 years old, 5 feet 9 inches tall, 175 pounds, a tool and die maker from Dayton, Ohio. He had been in the Marine Corps for 3 years, had fought on Guadalcanal and Bougainville, had seen what Japanese defenders could do to American assault forces. He knew what was waiting on that beach. The intelligence briefings had been clear. Iwo Jima was a fortress. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had spent 8 months turning the island into the most heavily fortified position in the Pacific. 21,000 Japanese soldiers waited in 11 miles of tunnels, 800 pillboxes, and countless bunkers connected by underground passages. They had artillery pre-registered on every inch of beach. They had orders not to waste ammunition on the approaching boats. They would wait until the Marines were on the sand, packed together, unable to maneuver. Then they would open fire. The Amtrak lurched as it crossed the reef line. Stein could feel the treads grinding against coral. Around him, 19 other Marines gripped their weapons and waited. Some prayed silently. Some stared straight ahead with the 1,000-yard stare of men who had seen combat before. Some were replacements who had never been shot at, their faces pale with the particular fear of the unknown. Stein checked the Stinger one more time. The weapon was heavy, nearly 40 pounds with its ammunition drum. It fired 30 caliber rounds at 1,000, 200 rounds per minute, twice the rate of the standard Browning light machine gun. The recoil was brutal. The barrel overheated quickly. But in the close quarters fighting that waited on Iwo Jima, rate of fire mattered more than anything else. The Amtrak's engine changed pitch as it climbed the beach. The ramp dropped. Morning light flooded the compartment. Stein was the first man out. If you want to see what Tony Stein did with his homemade weapon on the deadliest beach in Marine Corps history, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Stein. This story begins 23 years earlier, in a place called Dayton, Ohio. Population 200,000 inches, 1,921. An industrial city. The Wright brothers had built their first airplane in a Dayton bicycle shop. The city manufactured everything from cash registers to automobile parts. Factories lined the Great Miami River, their smokestacks filling the sky with proof of American productivity. Anthony Stein was born on September 30th, 1921, to a working-class family in North Dayton. His father worked in one of the city's machine shops, crafting precision parts for the industries that powered the American economy. His mother kept house and raised children in a modest home on a street where every father worked with his hands. Tony was the kind of boy who took things apart to see how they worked. Clocks, radios, his father's tools. Anything mechanical fascinated him. He would disassemble devices, examine each component, then reassemble them with a precision that surprised adults who expected childhood curiosity to result in broken toys rather than improved understanding. His teachers at Roosevelt High School recognized his aptitude for mechanical work. Mathematics came naturally. Shop class was where he truly excelled. While other students struggled to produce simple projects, Tony crafted objects of genuine craftsmanship. His hands understood metal and wood in ways his mind could not fully articulate. The Depression had hit Dayton hard. Factories that had employed thousands now operated with skeleton crews. Men who had worked their entire lives found themselves standing in bread lines. Tony watched his father struggle to maintain employment, watched his mother stretch every dollar, watched his neighbors lose their homes. The experience shaped him in ways that would not become apparent until later. He graduated from Roosevelt High School in 1939. The economy was beginning to recover, and Dayton's factories were hiring again. Tony found work as a tool and die maker, the same trade his father had practiced. The job required precision to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. A mistake meant ruined parts, wasted materials, lost wages. Tony did not make mistakes. The work taught him things that would prove essential in combat: patience, attention to detail, the understanding that complex problems could be solved by breaking them into smaller components, the confidence that came from mastering a difficult skill, and most importantly, the ability to look at a broken machine and understand how to make it work again. The attack on Pearl Harbor came on December 7th, 1941. Tony was 20 years old, working the day shift at a Dayton machine shop, when word spread through the factory floor. The radio in the foreman's office crackled with reports of Japanese aircraft, burning battleships, thousands dead. Men gathered around the small speaker, their faces shifting from disbelief to anger to something harder. Tony enlisted in the United States Marine Corps on September 18, 1942. He could have waited for the draft. He could have sought a deferment based on his skilled trade. The war industries needed tool and die makers. But Tony Stein was not the kind of man who waited while others fought. The Marine recruiter in Dayton processed his paperwork with the efficiency of a man who had been doing nothing else for 9 months. Another young man from Ohio, eager to fight, ready to serve. The recruiter noted Stein's mechanical background and suggested he might be assigned to an aviation unit. Stein said he wanted to be a rifleman. The recruiter shrugged and checked a different box. Boot camp at San Diego introduced Stein to the Marine Corps way of doing things. The drill instructors did not care about his skills as a machinist. They cared about his ability to follow orders instantly and without question. They cared about his physical conditioning. They cared about his proficiency with the M1 Garand rifle. Everything else was secondary. Stein adapted quickly. The physical demands were manageable for a man who had spent 3 years working factory floors. The discipline was familiar to someone who understood that precision required consistency. The transformation from civilian to Marine happened in layers, each day stripping away assumptions about comfort and individuality, each night reinforcing the understanding that survival depended on the men beside you. He qualified as an expert marksman, the highest rating available. The drill instructors noticed something in his shooting that went beyond accuracy. Stein understood his weapon. He could diagnose a malfunction by sound alone. He could strip and reassemble his rifle faster than men who had been shooting their entire lives. The mechanical intuition that had made him a skilled tool and die maker translated directly to weapons maintenance. After boot camp, Stein received orders that surprised him. He was assigned to the Para-Marines, the Marine Corps' elite parachute infantry. The Para-Marines were a new concept. Marines trained to jump from aircraft and fight behind enemy lines. Selection was rigorous. Training was brutal. Many volunteers washed out within the first week. Stein did not wash out. He completed jump school at Camp Gillespie near San Diego, earning his silver parachutist wings after 5 successful jumps. The training added skills that would prove valuable: the ability to operate independently, the confidence to function far from support, the mental toughness required to step into empty air and trust a silk canopy to save your life. But the Para-Marines never made a combat jump. The Pacific Theater's island hopping campaign did not suit airborne operations. The jungle terrain made drop zones nearly impossible to identify. The distances involved exceeded the range of transport aircraft. By 1944, the Marine Corps would disband its parachute units entirely, reassigning the men to conventional infantry. Stein went to war as a member of the 1st Parachute Battalion, but he fought on the ground. Guadalcanal in late 1942, Bougainville in 1943. 2 campaigns that taught him what the training could not: the reality of combat against an enemy who did not surrender, who fought to the death, who inflicted casualties with a ferocity that shocked men raised on assumptions of civilized warfare. On Guadalcanal, Stein saw Marines die from malaria as often as from Japanese bullets. He saw men go mad from the constant tension of jungle warfare, from the nights when every sound could be an enemy infiltrator, from the days when snipers picked off soldiers one by one. He learned to sleep in short intervals, to eat whatever was available, to function on reserves of energy he did not know he possessed. On Bougainville, he participated in patrols that hunted Japanese positions through rainforest, so thick that visibility dropped to yards. He learned to move silently, to communicate with hand signals, to kill quickly and quietly when the situation demanded it. He also learned the limitations of standard Marine weapons. The M1 Garand was an excellent rifle, but it held only 8 rounds. The Browning automatic rifle provided heavier firepower, but it was cumbersome in dense jungle, and its 20-round magazine emptied quickly during extended firefights. The light machine guns were effective, but required 2-man crews to operate efficiently. Stein began thinking about alternatives. His mechanical mind analyzed the problem. American infantry needed a weapon that combined the firepower of a machine gun with the portability of a rifle. Something one man could carry. Something with a high rate of fire. Something that would give individual Marines the ability to suppress enemy positions without waiting for crew-served weapons. The idea stayed with him through the rest of the Bougainville campaign. It stayed with him on the transport ships that carried survivors back to rear areas. It stayed with him during the months of rest and retraining that followed, and it crystallized when he encountered a wrecked Navy aircraft on a Pacific airfield. The aircraft was a TBF Avenger torpedo bomber, damaged beyond repair in a landing accident. It sat at the edge of the airstrip, stripped of useful components, waiting to be cut up for scrap. Most Marines walked past without a second glance. Stein stopped and stared. The Avenger carried a .30 caliber AN M2 Stinger machine gun in its rear turret. The weapon was designed for aerial combat, where rate of fire mattered more than accuracy. It fired 1,200 rounds per minute, twice the rate of ground-mounted .30 caliber weapons. The high cyclic rate was necessary because aerial gunners had only seconds to engage fast-moving targets. Stein saw something else. He saw a weapon that could be removed from its aircraft mount and adapted for infantry use. The AN M2 weighed roughly 22 pounds without its mount, lighter than the bar. It used standard .30 caliber ammunition. The main obstacle was the feeding system, which was designed for belt-fed operation from large aircraft-mounted ammunition containers. He spent 3 days acquiring the weapon and the components he needed to modify it. The process involved a combination of official requisition, creative scrounging, and outright theft. Marine supply sergeants were not in the habit of issuing aircraft weapons to infantry corporals. Stein worked around the system. The modification required skills that few Marines possessed. Stein fabricated a new stock from wood, shaping it to fit against his shoulder. He created a pistol grip that allowed one-handed control of the trigger mechanism. He adapted the feeding system to accept a drum magazine, giving him continuous fire capability without the need for a belt. He added a bipod for stability and a carrying handle for transport. The finished weapon weighed approximately 40 pounds loaded. It looked like nothing else in the Marine Corps inventory. It was ugly, improvised, held together in places with wire and tape. But when Stein test-fired it on a remote section of beach, it performed exactly as he had envisioned. He called it the Stinger. His commanding officer, Captain Frank Caldwell, was skeptical when Stein demonstrated the weapon. The Marine Corps had procedures for weapons development. Individual Marines did not simply build their own firearms and carry them into combat. There were questions of supply, maintenance, standardization. But Caldwell was also a combat veteran. He understood that official procedures sometimes lagged behind battlefield requirements. He watched Stein fire the Stinger at targets representing Japanese pillboxes. He watched the rate of fire shred sandbag emplacements that would have required grenades or demolition charges to destroy with standard weapons. He gave his approval. Stein would carry the Stinger to Iwo Jima, the weapon that no manual described, that no supply system supported, that one corporal from Dayton, Ohio, had built with his own hands in a Pacific rear area. The weapon that would save lives and take lives in equal measure on the black sand beaches of that terrible island. The invasion of Iwo Jima was designated Operation Detachment. The island was essential to American strategy in the Pacific. Located roughly 750 miles from Tokyo, Iwo Jima provided an airfield that Japanese fighters used to intercept B-29 bombers on their runs against the Japanese mainland. Capturing the island would eliminate that threat and provide an emergency landing field for damaged bombers returning from raids. The 28th Marine Regiment, 5th Marine Division, was assigned to land on the southwestern beaches and capture Mount Suribachi, the 556-foot volcanic cone that dominated the island's southern tip. Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines included Corporal Tony Stein. Their objective was a stretch of beach designated Green Beach. The preliminary bombardment began 3 days before the landing. Battleships and cruisers pounded Iwo Jima with thousands of shells. Carrier aircraft dropped bombs and strafed defensive positions. The firepower was overwhelming, sufficient to destroy any conventional defensive system. But Kuribayashi's defenses were not conventional. The Japanese had built underground. Their bunkers were covered with feet of volcanic rock and reinforced concrete. Many positions had multiple firing ports connected by tunnels, allowing defenders to shift positions after being spotted. The bombardment destroyed surface installations but barely touched the real defenses. Marine intelligence knew the island was fortified. They did not know the full extent. Maps showed Japanese positions based on aerial photography, but the tunnels and buried bunkers were invisible from above. The Marines expected a hard fight. They did not expect what they were about to encounter. The morning of February 19th, 1945, was overcast. The sea was rough enough to make the trip from transport to beach uncomfortable. Landing craft circled in the assembly areas, waiting for the signal to begin the assault. Marines checked their equipment one last time, tightened straps, loaded magazines. Stein sat with his squad in the Amtrak, the Stinger resting across his knees. He had test-fired the weapon that morning, confirming that the action worked smoothly. He carried 6 drum magazines, each holding approximately 100 rounds, 600 rounds total. Not enough for a sustained firefight, but enough to establish a foothold. The Amtraks formed into waves and began the run to the beach. The first wave hit the sand at 0900. The Japanese held their fire. The Marines emerged from their vehicles and began moving inland. The beach was steep, covered with soft volcanic ash that gave way underfoot. Men struggled to advance, sinking ankle-deep with every step. Equipment felt twice as heavy. The carefully planned assault began to lose cohesion as squads spread out, searching for solid ground. Still, the Japanese held their fire. The second wave landed, then the third. Marines piled up on the beach, struggling through the ash, creating exactly the target-rich environment that Kuribayashi had anticipated. At 0915, the island exploded. The barrage came from every direction simultaneously. Mortars from the slopes of Suribachi, artillery from positions in the island's interior, machine guns from pillboxes concealed in the volcanic rock, small arms fire from spider holes and tunnel mouths. The Marines on Green Beach had walked into a kill zone. Stein was 50 yards from the water when the firing started. The Marine in front of him dropped without a sound, a neat hole appearing in the back of his helmet. The Marine to his left screamed and clutched his stomach. Around him, men were falling everywhere. Training took over. Stein went flat, pressing himself into the volcanic ash. He could hear rounds cracking overhead, impacts throwing up geysers of black sand. The distinctive chatter of Japanese machine guns mixed with the slower, heavier reports of American weapons as Marines began returning fire. He raised his head and scanned the terrain. The beach rose steeply from the water's edge, climbing maybe 15 feet before leveling off into a terrace. Beyond the terrace, a jumbled landscape of volcanic rock provided the Japanese with perfect defensive positions. Stein could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different points. The nearest pillbox was approximately 40 yards ahead, firing into the mass of Marines trapped on the beach. The weapon was a Type 92 heavy machine gun, belt-fed, capable of sustained fire. Its field of fire covered a wide section of Green Beach. Every few seconds, another Marine fell. Stein rose to his feet. It was not a conscious decision in the way that most decisions are made. He did not weigh the risks, calculate the odds, consider alternatives. He simply stood up and ran toward the pillbox, because that pillbox was killing his friends, and someone had to stop it. The stinger came up to his hip. He pressed the trigger while still moving. The weapon roared, sending a stream of tracers toward the firing port. The Japanese gunner saw the fire coming and tried to traverse. Too slow. Stein's rounds punched through the aperture, ricocheting around the interior. The machine gun fell silent. Stein did not stop. He reached the pillbox, confirmed the occupants were dead, and immediately looked for the next target. Another pillbox, 30 yards to the right, was raking the beach with enfilade fire. Stein ran toward it, the stinger hammering from his hip. He fired in short bursts, conserving ammunition while maintaining suppression. The Japanese gunner ducked back from the aperture. A Marine with a demolition charge reached the blind side of the pillbox, while Stein kept the occupants suppressed. The explosion collapsed. The position. 2 pillboxes down. The beach was still a chaos of fire and screaming men, but the volume of incoming fire had noticeably decreased. Stein looked down at his stinger. The drum magazine was empty. He had expended 100 rounds in perhaps 45 seconds, 5 magazines remaining. He ejected the empty drum, slammed in a fresh one, and searched for the next target. The assault on Green Beach lasted all day. The original plan had called for capturing Mount Suribachi by D-Day +1. By nightfall on D-Day, the Marines had advanced barely 700 yards inland. The cost had been staggering. Across all beaches, over 2,400 Marines were killed or wounded on February 19th alone. But Stein kept fighting. He moved from position to position, engaging pillboxes and machine gun nests that threatened the advance. The Stinger's rate of fire allowed him to suppress positions that would have required mortar or artillery support to neutralize. Marines who had been pinned down found themselves able to move when Stein's fire drove the Japanese into cover. The pattern repeated throughout the morning. Identify a firing position, advance toward it under cover of his own fire, suppress the aperture while other Marines maneuvered, move to the next target. But the Stinger consumed ammunition at a prodigious rate. By 1,000, Stein had exhausted all 6 of his drum magazines. 600 rounds expended. Dozens of Japanese soldiers killed or suppressed. And now his weapon was useless without more ammunition. He made a decision that would be repeated 8 times before the day was over. Stein stripped off his helmet and ammunition belt, leaving only the Stinger. He lifted a wounded Marine onto his back and began running toward the beach. The route back to the water was 200 yards of open ground under constant fire. Japanese mortars were dropping rounds along the beach, trying to hit the landing craft that continued to bring in reinforcements and supplies. Machine guns swept the area randomly, searching for targets of opportunity. Snipers picked off individuals who exposed themselves. Stein ran through all of it. He reached the beach, delivered the wounded Marine to a corpsman, and immediately began scrounging ammunition. The supply situation was chaotic. Crates of ammunition had been scattered by the shelling. Some had been destroyed. Others had been buried in volcanic ash. Stein searched through the debris until he found 30 caliber rounds compatible with his weapon. Loading the drum magazines took time. Each 100 round drum required individual rounds to be pressed into the mechanism. Stein's fingers worked with the speed born of factory experience, the precision of a tool and die maker applied to the urgent necessity of combat. When the drums were loaded, he slung them over his shoulder, picked up another wounded Marine, and headed back toward the front. The second trip took longer. Japanese fire had intensified as the defenders realized the Marines were not going to be thrown back into the sea. Mortar rounds fell closer together. Machine gun fire was more concentrated. The bodies of Marines littered the route that Stein had covered minutes before. He reached his company's position, deposited the wounded Marine, and rejoined the assault. The Stinger came up. Another pillbox. Another stream of tracers. Another position. Silenced. The ammunition ran out again. Stein stripped down, loaded a wounded man, ran to the beach, scrounged ammunition, loaded magazines, carried another wounded man forward, resumed fighting. 8 times. 8 trips through a killing ground that would eventually claim nearly 7,000 Marine lives. 8 wounded Marines carried to safety under fire that never slackened. 8 loads of ammunition carried forward to keep the assault moving. The mathematics were simple. Without ammunition, the Stinger was useless. Without the Stinger, his company would face Japanese positions without adequate suppressive fire. Without adequate suppressive fire, more Marines would die. Therefore, he had to keep making the trips, regardless of the risk. It was the logic of a man who understood machines. If a component was necessary, you acquired it. If a system needed input to function, you provided that input. The fact that the input required running through enemy fire was simply a variable in the equation. By nightfall, Stein had personally killed at least 20 Japanese soldiers and suppressed countless others. His actions had directly enabled his company's advance. The Marines he carried to safety survived because he did what no reasonable calculation of risk would have suggested was possible. The battle for Iwo Jima lasted 36 days. The 5-day operation that planners had optimistically projected stretched into more than a month of the most brutal fighting in Marine Corps history. Every yard of volcanic rock had to be purchased with blood. Every pillbox required individual assault. Every tunnel system demanded methodical clearance by Marines, who knew that an enemy they thought dead might emerge behind them. Stein fought through all of it. The Stinger proved itself day after day. The weapon's rate of fire gave individual Marines the suppressive capability of a machine gun team. Stein used it to clear firing ports, to cover advances, to break up Japanese counterattacks that emerged from tunnels at night. The improvised weapon that no manual described became one of the most effective infantry tools on the island. But effectiveness came at a cost. The Stinger had no replacement parts. The barrel, subjected to thousands of rounds of high-rate fire, gradually degraded. The feed mechanism, designed for aircraft use, struggled with the grit and volcanic ash that permeated everything on Iwo Jima. Stein spent hours maintaining the weapon, fabricating replacements from salvaged parts, keeping the Stinger functional through ingenuity and determination. The Japanese defenders fell back slowly, contesting every position, making the Marines pay for every foot of advance. Mount Suribachi fell on February 23rd, 4 days after the landing. The famous photograph of the flag raising provided a morale boost, but the fighting continued for another month. Stein was everywhere. His squad came to rely on the Stinger's firepower. Other squads requested his support when they faced particularly difficult positions. Officers learned that a radio call to Stein's location could bring suppressive fire that would break resistance that had stalled conventional assaults. He also continued teaching others. The mechanical skills that had created the Stinger applied to every weapon in the Marine Corps inventory. Rifles that jammed in the volcanic ash could be cleared. Machine guns that overheated could be cooled and returned to action. Stein shared his knowledge freely, understanding that every functioning weapon meant better chances of survival for the Marines who carried them. By late February, the Marines had pushed the Japanese into the northern part of the island. The defensive positions there were even more elaborate than those on the beaches. Tunnels ran for hundreds of yards, connecting positions that appeared isolated but could reinforce each other through underground passages. Artillery and mortars continued falling on American positions as Japanese gunners fired from caves that shells could not reach. The advance slowed to a crawl. Units that had landed with 250 men now operated with 50 or fewer. Replacements arrived, but lacked the experience of the veterans they replaced. The strain of constant combat wore on everyone. Stein maintained his routine. Wake before dawn, check the Stinger, move with his squad to whatever objective had been assigned, engage the enemy, carry ammunition forward, carry wounded back. Repeat until darkness made movement too dangerous. Sleep for a few hours. Wake before dawn. Continue. The routine sustained him. Work had always been how Tony Stein processed the world. The methodical completion of tasks provided structure that chaos could not destroy. Each day brought specific problems that could be solved with specific actions. The larger questions, Why were they here? How many more would die? When would it end? Those questions were for others. Stein focused on what he could control. March 1st, 1945. 10 days after the landing, the 28th Marines were assaulting a ridgeline in the island's northern sector. The Japanese had established a network of bunkers along the reverse slope, positions that could not be reached by artillery or naval gunfire. The only way to take them was direct infantry assault. Stein's company was assigned to the left flank of the attack. The approach required crossing open ground before reaching the rocks that would provide cover for the final assault. Japanese machine guns covered every foot of the route. Mortars were pre-registered on likely staging areas. The attack jumped off at 0700. Two squads moved forward while others provided covering fire. Stein was with the lead element, the Stinger, ready at his hip. The first Japanese machine gun opened fire when they were halfway across the open ground. Stein engaged immediately. The Stinger's tracers reached out toward the firing port, forcing the gunner to duck back. The squads kept moving, closing the distance to the rocks. Another machine gun opened from a different position. Then another. The Japanese had waited until the Marines were committed, then revealed multiple firing points simultaneously. It was a trap designed to catch the assault force in a crossfire. Marines began dropping. The lead squad took 3 casualties in the first seconds. Men dove for cover that did not exist, pressing themselves into shallow depressions, hiding behind corpses, doing anything to escape the converging streams of fire. Stein did not stop. He advanced into the fire, the Stinger hammering at first one position then another. He could not suppress them all, but he could force the gunners to shift their aim, give his fellow Marines seconds of relief that might mean survival. A bullet struck him in the chest. The impact spun him sideways but did not drop him. The round had hit the metal of the Stinger's receiver, deflecting before it could penetrate his body. A bruise that would turn purple and black, but no wound. He kept firing. Another round caught his left arm, tearing through muscle, missing bone by millimeters. Blood began soaking his sleeve immediately. Stein shifted the Stinger to a one-handed grip and continued engaging targets. The assault stalled. The Marines were pinned, unable to advance or retreat. The Japanese gunners, emboldened by their success, increased their rate of fire. Mortars began falling among the trapped Americans. Stein knew what had to happen. Someone had to break the deadlock. Someone had to reach those machine gun positions and silence them, or everyone in the open would die. He began moving forward. Not crawling, not seeking cover, standing up and walking toward the Japanese line, the Stinger firing from his hip, his wounded arm hanging at his side. It was suicide. Every Marine who saw him knew it was suicide. The Japanese gunners saw him coming and concentrated their fire on the single figure advancing through the bullets. Stein took another hit, his leg this time, a round that punched through his thigh and emerged from the other side. He stumbled, but did not fall. He was 30 yards from the nearest machine gun when the Stinger ran dry. He had no time to reload. He had no other weapon. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, barely able to stand. He threw the Stinger at the nearest enemy soldier, a man who had emerged from cover to finish him off. The heavy weapon struck the Japanese soldier in the face, staggering him. Stein kept walking. He picked up a rifle from a fallen Marine, an M1 Garand, 8 rounds. He shot the man he had hit with the Stinger. He advanced to the machine gun position, shot the gunner, shot the assistant gunner, shot a third man who was trying to traverse the weapon. Marines behind him were moving now, emboldened by his assault. They reached the rocks. They began working their way toward the other machine gun positions. Stein tried to join them. His leg collapsed under him. He went down in a heap, bleeding out in the volcanic ash, 20 yards from the position he had just captured. A corpsman reached him within seconds, started working on the wounds, called for a stretcher team. But the fight was not over. Japanese soldiers emerged from a tunnel mouth 40 yards away, a counterattack. They had been waiting, hidden underground, for exactly this moment. Stein pushed away the corpsman, grabbed the rifle he had dropped, tried to rise. A bullet caught him in the head. Corporal Tony Stein, 23 years old, tool and die maker from Dayton, Ohio, builder of the weapon that bore no official designation, died on a ridgeline in the northern sector of Iwo Jima on March 1st, 1945. He never saw the flag raised on Suribachi. He never saw the island declared secure on March 26th. He never saw the B-29S that would use Iwo Jima's airfields to launch raids against Japan. He never saw victory. He died as he had lived, moving forward, engaging the enemy, refusing to accept the limitations that circumstances seemed to impose. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor was submitted within days of Stein's death. The witnesses were unanimous. Corporal Stein had single-handedly assaulted multiple enemy positions. He had made 8 trips through enemy fire to resupply ammunition and evacuate wounded. He had killed at least 20 Japanese soldiers on D-Day alone. He had continued fighting despite multiple wounds. He had died leading an assault that broke a Japanese defensive line. The citation was approved on December 17, 1945. The Medal of Honor was presented posthumously to Stein's family in a ceremony at Dayton, Ohio. The citation read in part, "With complete disregard for his own personal safety, Corporal Stein unhesitatingly went forward to take the lead during a fierce firefight between his company and deeply entrenched hostile positions. Returning to the beach under heavy fire, he secured additional ammunition and grenades and returned to the front lines. Killed while going to the assistance of a comrade, Corporal Stein contributed materially to the final capture of the island. But the official language could not capture what Tony Stein had actually done. It could not describe the hours he spent building the Stinger, the mechanical intuition that allowed him to see a weapon where others saw wreckage. It could not convey the courage required to stand up on that beach, to run toward the Japanese positions while everyone around him was going to ground. It could not explain the 8 trips through fire, the wounded Marines carried to safety, the ammunition scrounged from chaos and carried forward. It could not articulate the final advance, the walk through bullets that should have killed him a dozen times, the refusal to stop even when his body was failing. Some things exceeded the capacity of official language. Some acts transcended documentation. What Tony Stein did on Iwo Jima was one of those acts. The Stinger did not survive the battle. The improvised weapon was lost somewhere on the island, probably buried in volcanic ash or destroyed by the fighting that continued after Stein's death. No example exists in any museum. The weapon that one man built from aircraft wreckage left no physical legacy. But the idea survived. Military historians who studied Iwo Jima recognized that Stein had solved a problem that conventional weapons development had not addressed. The infantry needed lighter automatic weapons with higher rates of fire. The gap between rifle and machine gun was too wide. Individual Marines needed the ability to generate suppressive fire without the weight and crew requirements of standard machine guns. The lessons contributed to post-war weapons development. The M60 machine gun, adopted in 1957, weighed less than previous designs and could be operated by a single soldier. The M16 rifle, developed in the 1960s, offered selective fire capability that allowed individual troops to generate automatic fire when needed. Modern squad automatic weapons trace their lineage to problems that men like Stein had identified through bitter experience. Dayton, Ohio, remembered its native son. The Veterans of Foreign Wars post was named in his honor. Streets bore his name. His story was taught in local schools. The tool and die maker who built his own weapon and died using it against the enemies of his country. The Marine Corps preserved his memory through different means. Recruit training instructors invoked his name as an example of initiative and courage. His story appeared in official histories of Iwo Jima. The improvised weapon became a teaching point. Marines adapt and overcome, using whatever tools are available to accomplish the mission. His family received the Medal of Honor in 1945. The blue ribbon and bronze star represented the nation's highest recognition of valor. The medal sits in a display case now, viewed by visitors who learn about a young man from Ohio who died on a volcanic island 6,000 miles from home. But medals cannot capture lives. They mark moments, not trajectories. The full story of Tony Stein, the childhood in Dayton, the factory work, the mechanical aptitude, the transformation from civilian to Marine, the creation of the Stinger, the 8 trips through fire, the final assault. That story exists only in the memories of those who knew him and the written records that preserve what witnesses recalled. The 5th Marine Division suffered over 7,000 casualties on Iwo Jima. Nearly 2,000 Marines from the division were killed. Many of them died on the beaches where Stein made his 8 trips. Many of them were saved by the suppressive fire his Stinger provided. Many of them survived because one man kept moving when every reasonable calculation said to stop. The wounded Marines he carried to safety lived to go home. Some raised families. Some returned to civilian jobs. Some carried the scars of Iwo Jima for the rest of their lives, physical and psychological. They owed their lives to a tool and die maker who would not leave them to die. The machine gun positions he destroyed stopped killing Americans. Each pillbox silenced, each bunker suppressed, each tunnel mouth covered meant Marines who did not die. The mathematics of combat are brutal, but they are simple. Every enemy killed or suppressed reduces friendly casualties. Stein understood this with the clarity of a man who thought in terms of mechanical efficiency. Iwo Jima was declared secure on March 26, 1945, 25 days after Stein's death. The cost had been staggering. Nearly 7,000 Americans killed, almost 20,000 wounded. Japanese casualties exceeded 18,000 dead. The island that was supposed to fall in 5 days required 36 days of the most intense combat in Marine Corps history. But the island fell. The airfields were captured. B-29 bombers that might have crashed in the ocean found emergency landing strips that saved thousands of aircrew lives. The air defense threat that had endangered raids on Japan was eliminated. The strategic objectives were achieved. Tony Stein did not see the results of his sacrifice. He died 25 days before the island was secured, 157 days before Japan surrendered, in a fight for a ridgeline whose name would not appear in any history book. But his contribution was recorded. His actions were documented. His courage was recognized with the highest honor the nation could bestow. And his story continues to inspire, nearly 80 years after his death on a volcanic island in the Pacific. The tool and die maker's instincts stayed with Stein to the end. When standard weapons proved inadequate, he built something better. When that weapon ran out of ammunition, he found more. When his body began failing, he kept functioning. The machine kept running until it could not run anymore. His fellow Marines remembered specific things. The sound of the Stinger, distinctive, faster than anything else on the battlefield. The sight of Stein advancing through fire that should have killed him. The relief of seeing him appear with fresh ammunition after another trip to the beach. The confidence that came from knowing someone that capable was fighting beside them. They remembered his funeral less clearly. Iwo Jima did not allow for formal ceremonies during the fighting. The dead were buried in temporary graves, marked with crude crosses made from ammunition crates. The proper memorials would come later, after the island was secured, after the survivors had time to honor the fallen. By then, the living had already begun the process of forgetting. Not forgetting Stein specifically, but forgetting the immediate intensity of combat. The mind protects itself by blurring the sharpest memories. The screaming fades to silence. The blood fades to shadow. The faces of the dead become less distinct with each passing year. But some things remained. The official records preserved facts. The Medal of Honor citation preserved recognition. The stories passed between veterans preserved what official language could not capture. And the weapon, the improvised creation that had no designation in any manual, preserved in memory if not in physical form, reminded those who heard about it that Marines adapt and overcome. The USS Tony Stein, DE 1065, was commissioned in 1972, a destroyer escort named in honor of the Medal of Honor recipient. The ship served until 1988, carrying his name across the world's oceans. Sailors who crewed the vessel learned about their ship's namesake, about the tool and die maker who built his own weapon, about the 8 trips through fire. The naming was appropriate. Destroyer escorts were working ships, not glamorous like carriers or powerful like battleships. They performed essential duties that larger vessels could not be spared for: convoy escort, anti-submarine warfare, patrol. They were the mechanical horses of the fleet, reliable and unglamorous and necessary. Tony Stein would have understood that kind of service. He had been a working man all his life, a tool and die maker who created useful things from raw materials. The destroyer escort that bore his name continued that tradition, creating utility from dedication, accomplishing missions that contributed to larger goals. The ship was decommissioned in 1988, sold to Mexico, and eventually scrapped. Its service life had spanned 16 years, a respectable career for a vessel of its class. The name passed out of active service, though it remains eligible for future ships. The memorial at Iwo Jima lists Tony Stein among the honored dead. Visitors to the island, rare though they are, can find his name carved in stone alongside the other Marines who gave their lives to capture 7.5 square miles of volcanic rock. The island itself has changed little since 1945. The beaches are still black. The volcanic rock still dominates the terrain. Suribachi still rises from the southern tip. But the tunnels have collapsed. The bunkers have eroded. The physical infrastructure that made Iwo Jima a fortress has deteriorated over the decades. Only the memorials remain, stone markers that preserve names and dates for generations who never knew the men they commemorate. Tony Stein's marker includes his rank, his unit, his date of death. It does not mention the stinger. It does not describe the 8 trips through fire. It does not explain how a tool and die maker from Dayton built a weapon from aircraft wreckage and used it to save lives and take lives on a beach that should have been impossible to cross. Some things cannot be carved in stone. Some legacies exceed the capacity of memorials to preserve. The full truth of what Tony Stein accomplished exists in the cumulative record of those who witnessed it, who wrote about it, who passed the story from one generation to the next. At 0859, on the morning of February 19th, 1945, Corporal Tony Stein crouched in the bottom of an amphibious tractor as it churned toward the black sand beaches of Iwo Jima. In his hands was a weapon that did not exist in any Army or Marine Corps manual. He had built it himself from the wreckage of a Navy torpedo bomber. He called it the Stinger. The ramp dropped. Morning light flooded the compartment. Japanese defenders waited in their bunkers, fingers on triggers, ready to turn the beach into a killing ground. Stein was the first man out. He ran toward the enemy. He fired his improvised weapon at positions that should have been impregnable. He killed 20 men on the first day. He made 8 trips through fire that should have killed him. He carried wounded Marines to safety. He carried ammunition forward. He kept the assault moving when it should have stalled. 10 days later, he died on a ridgeline in the island's north, still advancing, still fighting, still refusing to accept the limitations that physics and probability seemed to impose. He was 23 years old. He was a tool and die maker from Dayton, Ohio. He was a Marine. The weapon he built had no official designation. The courage he displayed had no reasonable explanation. The legacy he left behind has no expiration date. Some men are remembered for the positions they held. Tony Stein should be remembered for the position he built, the weapon he created from wreckage, the solution he improvised when standard solutions failed. A tool and die maker's instinct. When the machine is broken, fix it. When no tool exists for the job, build one. When the situation seems impossible, find a way. Tony Stein found a way. The Stinger was his answer to a problem the Marine Corps had not solved. The 8 trips were his answer to a supply situation that threatened to strand his company without ammunition. The final assault was his answer to a defensive line that threatened to stop the advance. He kept finding answers until his body stopped working. Then, the machine finally stopped. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do us a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about tool and die makers who built their own weapons. About Marines who made 8 trips through fire to keep their companies fighting. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served in the Pacific. Tell us if you knew Tony Stein's story before today. Tell us if you knew that a corporal from Dayton built a weapon from aircraft wreckage and used it to help capture Iwo Jima. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for making sure that the tool and die maker from Ohio, the man who built the Stinger, does not disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered. You are helping make that happen.